Okay, folks, many moons ago I promised a review of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd Edition, and apologize I haven't gotten to it sooner, but let's talk about it now, shall we? Warhammer, as you can tell by the little blurb down there, and let's see if I can present it to you, it's a grim world of perilous adventure. And this rings very true. If you watched my setting review, you probably got an idea for the world in general and how it's ugly, dirty, dangerous, and basically daily life is a struggle. Well, that's very much the case in this game. Your characters, as compared to other fantasy role-playing games, say Dungeons & Dragons, etc., your characters are much more average, mediocre, day-to-day type of folks. And I'll talk about that in system terms in a moment. But so your characters aren't nearly as epic, as powerful, and they don't grow to the same heights that you would in those other types of epic fantasy games. Your characters are much more, especially when they start off in their first careers as starting characters, they are much more in line with the average person, with the average villager, the commoner. In fact, many of your characters' possible careers are common, everyday careers, like bone pickers and charcoal burners and rat catchers and that sort of thing. But of course, like any role-playing game, as you play with the characters, as you go through adventures, you will gain experience points, and then you advance the characters. They get better at things, they acquire new abilities and new skills, and so your characters do actually achieve greater heights. And so I guess the first place to start when talking about Warhammer is to talk about the career system, because it's a very interesting, unique system. It's basically, if you wanted to try to put it into similar common terms, careers are kind of like classes, but they're a little more specific in scope. And so to give you an idea, in the core book, there are 80 basic careers, and a basic career, and that's not an exact number, that's just my last estimate as far as I can recall. A basic career is like a standard class that anybody can start into, can pursue, even as a starting character. Talking about characters like soldiers and thieves, and then, like I said, your commoner type, and even merchants and miners and boatmen, and all these different types of careers that don't take an abnormal amount of specialized training in order to achieve. But you also have 60 some odd advanced careers, and the most similar thing to advanced careers might be, if you're familiar with Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition, your prestige classes. And basically what that means is that an advanced career can only be achieved once you've met certain requirements. In Warhammer, those requirements are completing prerequisite careers. So if you wanted to become a crime lord, which is an advanced career, first you have to, complete this career and this career, like thief, for example, and then moving into highwayman, and then from highwayman you try to become a crime lord, etc. So you've got ladders of advancement. But the neat thing about careers is that what your careers do for you is they determine the way your character's attributes will increase over the course of the game. They will determine what skills you acquire, and they will determine the talents, or talents are somewhat like feats, maybe. The talents that you acquire over the course of advancing in that career. The nice thing about careers is that you can always opt out of a career, even if you're midway through it. So even if you've only completed halfway through the soldier career, for example, and you decided that you saw another career that would make sense for your character to go into and that offered skills and abilities that you really wanted your character to have, you can always, at any time, as long as you have enough experience points, you can spend those experience points to change to a different career. But careers have specific career exits that you can leave into. If you've completed the career, it is cheaper for you to achieve your career exits. So, a mercenary, the mercenary captain or whatever, the veteran, can only be achieved by somebody who's completed like a soldier type career, And so that's one of the ways that you get into advanced careers, is you have to have completed certain basic careers that exit into those advanced careers. You can only ever, like I was talking about opting out of a career, you can only ever opt out into other basic careers. You can never opt out into an advanced career. And that's basically achieved through experience points, and the same way you spend experience points in a career to increase your attributes, to increase the skills that you know, and to add additional talents to your character. So let's talk about the basic system. As we're talking about attributes and skills, your Warhammer Fantasy is a percentile-based system. So all of your rolls pretty much throughout the game are going to be percentile rolls, and your attributes are ranked percentilely. And generally speaking, your attributes for most starting characters are going to range somewhere between about on the very low end from about 25 for humans in some attributes, and some of the other races in some of their attributes, up to maybe 40, or even if you're very lucky, you might start with 50. If it was, say, like dwarves, they're naturally higher at their toughness, and so if you rolled really, really well, in fact, if you rolled your maximum amount on your starting attributes, you might be lucky and start with a 50% in toughness. So whenever you're testing an attribute, you just roll percentile dice, and you want to get equal to or less than the value of the attribute. So in a really, really tough dwarfs instance, you would want to roll that 50% or less if your toughness was being tested. And that's the basic mechanics of it. Now, so let's talk about what attributes are there. So there are 8 attributes in total for Warhammer. Most of them are self-explanatory. Strength, toughness, and agility are your physical attributes. Intelligence, willpower, and fellowship are your mental or social attributes. And fellowship is pretty much charisma. It governs your social type skills. And then there are 2 attributes specific to Warhammer: weapon skill and ballistic skill. And those are basically your attack values. Those are your attack traits. So that's the skills that you roll against, or the attributes that you roll against whenever you're using either a melee weapon or a ranged weapon in combat. So I mentioned that your characters advance their attributes and they advance their skills as they go through careers. So skills, you have different levels of training in skills, and all skills are tied to a particular attribute, whatever attribute it is that they're associated with. And so if there are basic skills, which anybody can use, whether they're trained in them or not, and then there are advanced skills, which can only be used if your character has trained in those skills. If you don't have skill training in medicine, you can't make medicine skill checks. First aid is a lesser form of the medicine skill, which is a basic skill that anybody can use, because anybody can try to apply a bandage, but not anybody can actually try to treat diseases or, amputate limbs safely and that sort of thing. And so that falls under the advanced type of skills. So if you're untrained in a basic skill, you would use half the value of the default attribute for that skill. So let's say you had a 40% in your agility attribute, which is a pretty good value, and you wanted to try and sneak by some guards or something like that, but you weren't trained in your stealth skill, then you would divide the agility attribute by 2, giving you 20%, and that's your base chance of success attempting that skill check. Now there are modifiers that the GM can apply, both positive and negative, to any given skill check, and done in increments of 10%, from plus or minus 10% up to plus or minus 30%. So favorable conditions might give you up to a 20 or 30% bonus. Unfavorable conditions might give you up to a 20 or 30% penalty to your base skill value. Regardless, I believe you always succeed on a natural 1, and you always fail on a natural 100, as I recall. But anyway, so the difference is, if you're trained in a skill, you get to use the full attribute value of that skill. So if your character had a 40% agility and was trained in stealth, you would have a 40% base chance to succeed at your stealth check. And then there are two additional levels of expertise in a skill. If you ever were to acquire skill training for a particular skill from a career, and you already have that skill, excuse me, you gain a level of expertise, and that adds an additional 10% to the value of the skill. So 40% would become 50%. If you ever were to acquire that skill again through another career or through another source, then you can add up to one more level of expertise, and that adds a plus 20% to the skill value. So 40% becomes 60% instead of 50. So your characters do get better at skills as you increase. Likewise, your characters also spend experience points as they pursue careers to advance their attributes. And those, when attributes increase, the default values for the related skills increase. And so, depending on what career you're in, your attribute it determines your attribute increases. So if you're in the thief career, thieves generally favor agility, so they might be able to increase their agility attribute over the course of their career by up to 10%. And you do this in terms of you do this in increments of 5% when you advance. So if you started off with 40% in agility and you were pursuing the thief career and you spent your advances, you can advance your agility up an additional 10% up to a base of 50. So your base skill value for any agility skills would then become 50%, and then you can add your expertise onto that. So you can see, and especially as you get into the more advanced careers which offer higher and higher maximum increases to your attributes, you can actually get pretty significantly competent by the time you get up there. But one of the biggest complaints about Warhammer is that at the beginning, a lot of players look at their character sheet and they realize, well, they've got all these attribute and skill values that sit at 20%, 30%, 40% if they're lucky, and and a lot of people get turned off by that because they say, well, my character is skilled in stealth, but he's still only got a 40% likely chance to succeed, and they get turned off by that. But remember, GMs can always apply modifiers in certain situations, and players should be looking for those opportunities to give themselves, the benefit of those modifiers whenever possible. You don't want to be sneaking around in broad daylight. You want to be sneaking in shadows, taking cover, and the GM might give you bonuses, 10, 20, 30% bonuses to your checks when you're doing so. So even a 40% skill value can potentially be up to a 70% chance of success, and that's just a starting, base level character. Warhammer also is unique in that your combat and damage and wounds are very lethal. As I probably was explaining before, it's a very dangerous place, and you don't want to pick fights recklessly, because your characters in Warhammer have wound thresholds, and your wound thresholds very rarely ever change. Basically, when you create a starting character, you have X number of wounds, and they generally range from about 10 to about 14 on the high end. And you might get lucky if you're playing very physically demanding careers like soldier, troll slayer, mercenary, that type of thing. Your characters, just like your attributes, can increase. You also have other advances, and you can advance your wounds by 1 point at a time by spending experience points. And a troll slayer is a great example of a career who, I believe the troll slayer basic career can acquire up to +3 additional wounds as he advances in his career. So if he started off with, say, 12 wound points, if went through his troll slayer career and acquired the other 3, he could have up to 15 wounds. But very rarely will your character's wound threshold exceed, I think, about 4 or 5 points higher at very most from whatever your starting wounds are. So this isn't something like D&D where just as you climb in levels, you get tougher and tougher. The way that you get tougher in Warhammer is by your skills increasing, because you use skills to defend yourself.